Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is Satish. Did you know that 93% of Indian large cap active funds underperformed the S&P India large mid cap index in the last 5 years? That's right. Only 7 out of 100 managed to beat the market. This stat directly comes from SPIVA 2024 report that is by S&P Global. So if you're relying on mutual funds, the odds aren't exactly in your favor unless you're consistently picking those rare 7% of funds. This is where index funds or index investing comes into the picture. So if you want to grow your wealth without constantly tracking fund performance or fund managers, switching schemes, all of these things, index funds might be just a smarter way of doing things. In this video, I'll walk you through what index funds are, why I prefer them, and the exact portfolio I have built using index funds. Let's dive in. Just to give you some context how this all started. When I first started investing, I bought about 20 to 25 different mutual funds, across large cap, small cap, mid cap, all of these, right? Be it HDFC large cap, in ICICI, all of these things, right? It looked pretty good on paper, but after a few months, I realized it was like grocery shopping, I was picking anything that I liked, when I was in supermarket, right? So that's how it looked when I looked at it after some time. When I started to look at the performance metrics and all of that, it was really messy. The portfolio didn't look good. Too many overlaps. It was hard to track, and I was really constantly checking which funds are doing well, which manager is moving well, all of these. So essentially, it was a mess for me, right? So that's when I decided, I had to do something about it. It was not sustainable for me as a passive investor. It was very exhausting as well for me, right? So then I spoke to a few friends, who are in this space, who are basically, into investing a lot more than I am, right? And they said, if you're going to spend so much time as a passive investor, you might as well, buy direct stocks by analyzing companies, rather than just doing research on mutual fund managers and all of these things. So that's when I stumbled upon index funds, and I started to read more about them, and I realized this is probably the passive approach I was looking for. Something that's simple, something that's low cost, and you don't need to really bet on a fund manager. You are betting on the index, which is essentially the market. So that's how I started my journey with index investing. It just made sense, right? Especially for someone who may want to build wealth passively without all the noise in the market. So before we dive into building a portfolio, let's quickly understand what exactly are these index funds. An index fund is a type of investment that aim to mirror the performance of a specific stock market index. So think of Nifty 50, Next 50, Mid Cap 150, S&P 500, it's in the US. All of these are examples of indexes essentially, that represent the market of a country, all of that things, right? So now here is the key part, right? Unless actively managed funds where the fund manager pick and choose which ones to put in their fund, here you are simply investing in the passive index. What they do is they simply invest in all the stocks that make up the index in the proportion that are part of the index. So there are no personal opinions, there is no extra research done by them, and they're just trying to mirror the market. So these indexes are typically broad-based, and and they represent a significant chunk of market, right? For example, Nifty 50 includes the top 50 companies in India by the market cap, right? That's what Nifty 50 stands for. And again, these indexes are also rebalanced. It's not like they're set in stone, right? These are rebalanced, essentially, they're shuffled, right? Based on, how the market performs. Every 6 months or so, if a company is not performing, it goes below the 50, right? And then something new comes up. So that way you're not really looking at underperformance as well. So you are going with the overall market performance. So that's what the idea is. So in short, index funds give you the diversification, and also the expense ratios are so low, it's a low cost, and also you get the exposure of the overall market with no active fund manager involved. So you don't have to really look at which fund manager changing, all of these things. Sounds simple, right? Let's look at more details in it, right? So now that you know what index funds are, the next question is, why should you invest in them, right? I mean, gave a stat in the beginning, but fundamentally, why should you invest in them? So let's look back at the data from SPIVA report, right, from 2024. So that's SPIVA stands for S&P's Index versus Active Study. And as per that, 93% of Indian equity large cap active funds underperformed the S&P India large mid cap index over the last 5 years. So you can see on the screen essentially what we're talking about, right? How it looks across various segments. So this index is similar to the Nifty large cap. Like you might be thinking, oh, I just need to pick the top seven, right? It should be an easy thing to do, right? Well, here is the big catch, right? Just to give a perspective, India has about 44 asset management companies. So these are the companies that actually manage mutual funds and issue mutual funds and things like that, right? As per AMFI, right? And there are total 1,791 mutual fund schemes. Now tell me, how are you going to identify those top 7 funds from a pool of over 1,700 options? You're really confused as a passive investor. You will really be lost, and you can't really keep track of all of them to pick which one is the the top one, right? Or to be the top. And it changes over years, right? And even if you do, right, will that be the next year, right? So again, it's a constant struggle that you'll have to go through. And again, you also have to remember the past performance does not indicate the future returns. And again, fundamentally, we are all passive investors, you and I, right? So we don't want to really constantly be tracking, researching, comparing, and switching all these funds, So that is where exactly, where the index investing shines. So you are not really betting on a fund manager, but you are rather betting on the market itself. In this context, we are betting on the Indian stock market itself. So you are trusting the long-term growth of the Indian economy or the global one, right? And depending on the index you pick, right, and then you're going with that. So if the market does well, then you do well as well. You take a rip of that. You're not really going with that. So now that I've covered, why you should invest in mutual funds, let's talk about the types of index funds that are out there. So broadly, index funds come in, fundamentally 3, right? 3 types. One is debt-related index funds, equity-related ones, and commodities ones. But for the sake of today's discussion, right, we'll focus mainly on equity-related index funds. I'm not going to look at debt and all of that because I don't invest, and I don't think it may not be something that is very common that you use, right? So within equity, now let's look at equity-based index funds. Within equity, there are 4 main categories or 4 main types, rather I would say, right, of index funds. So one are broad-based index funds. So these are broad-based market index funds like Nifty 50 and all of that. And there are sectoral index funds which are for a particular sector, banking, all of that, right? And there are thematic index funds that are go after theme, and there are strategy index funds that are momentum or all of these things. So to keep things simple, we'll stick to the broad-based indexes for now because that's where most of my investment goes into, and that's where you should also be looking at. And that's the starting point for a beginner or a passive investor, right? So we'll get to the other ones in the future videos, but for now, let's stick with the broad-based index. So what are these broad-based indexes? These are indexes that represent the entire stock market or a large part of it. So in Indian context, talking about National Stock Exchange, NSE, NSE is Nifty 500, right? So here is how it works, right? You take the market cap of every listed company in Indian stock market and NSE and then sort them by the highest to the lowest by market cap. And then pick the top 500 of those, right? So this essentially forms the Nifty 500 index. That's how it is, right? That's a true snapshot of Indian stock market, and this represents about close to over 90% of the Indian, market, value, right? That's how it is. Now, from Nifty 500 universe, right? NSE, which is National Stock Exchange, has created multiple sub-indexes, right? By breaking down them into 50s or 100s, So here are some of the common ones, that you keep hearing and what people usually invest in. So Nifty 100, which represents the top 100 companies, Nifty 50, top 50 companies. So, you can see on the screen at what I'm talking about, right? Nifty, next 50 companies that rank from 51 to 100, Nifty mid-cap 150, companies rank from 101 to 250, small cap 250, the next 250 companies. And also a Nifty large and mid-cap, are a mix of top and mid-tier companies. So if you look at it, all of these are different slices of the top 500 companies. So, you may ask why so many, why so many they have created, and again confusing. So, well, it's all about the risk and return, right? And preference of the investor. So each index gives you a slight different exposure. Some are less volatile, some give higher returns, some give lower returns, some have higher risk, all of these, right? So you as an investor can pick based on what suits your investment goals. So now that you understand the types of index funds and how they work, let me show you how I personally built my portfolio using these categories of funds. So as a note of caution, before I dive into my portfolio itself, let me quickly share my time horizon, because everybody's risk appetites are different, right? My time horizon, risk appetite are the ones that define my portfolio. So for me, my biggest financial goals are tied to my kids' education. For one of them, that will be 9 years, and for my second one, it's going to be in 13 to 14 years, right? So that gives me a relatively long runway, and I have a little more runway to take higher risk. So which means that if you have a short-term need, you can't take as much risk as I've taken. So my portfolio is representing my goal. So you need to be very careful on how you build your portfolio. Now that you know, here is how I structured my portfolio in the fund, right? So 15% of my portfolio is going to Nifty 50 index, 15% in the next 50 index, and 20% into mid-cap index. And for small cap, I didn't really go with the index funds. Honestly, I don't feel the index is well built in the small cap space, because there are so many companies that are churning, and I feel that this is not so I really went with a actively managed fund in this case. But eventually I may move and go back to like an index fund as well. So the funds that I've taken is Nippon Small Cap and Quant Small Cap, split equally with 20% each. So you could also consider Canara Robeco, other kinds of small cap funds as well that are out there. So again, this is something I've taken. So almost 90% of my allocation is done, and the rest of the 5% is in international funds like Motilal Oswal's S&P 500 index and all of that. And you may ask, why the heavy allocation for small cap? It's simple, right? My time horizon is very long. I can take more risk now because many of these take 10 years. So small caps can perform in the long run, but not in the short term. So if you want safer zone with a lesser time horizon, stick to Nifty 50 or next 50. That's how it is, right? So again, I've set aside some for international funds, as I mentioned, right? But again, some of them are accepting, some are not accepting. But again, I want to just get some exposure to the external market. So you can look at the screen, right? Exactly like how my overall portfolio is structured, right? So this is my target portfolio. What I mean is that, and this is how I structured it, and it reflects to it 80 to 90% at the moment. But I'm still in the process of getting them to these levels because of the mistakes I've done in the beginning. So if you're a new investor, you could actually follow this and get it straight from the day one, right? In addition to this, I also hold a couple of funds. These are good funds. Parag Parik's Flexi Cap that is more they're doing well from the last. So and also I have some other strategy-based funds as well. I'll break these small investments in the next videos as well, right? So again, the key takeaway from your portfolio is from my portfolio or your portfolio is your time horizon and your risk appetite. So you should really pick something that fits your risk and your time journey, right? So some of you may wonder, why did you why so many index funds in a portfolio? Why can't you just pick one? And so this is how I approached it, right? So I've diversified across 4 types of equity index funds, Nifty 50, Next 50, Mid Cap, Small Cap 250, essentially, right? And why? Because each of them come with a very different risk reward profile. For example, Nifty 50 gives a very steady large cap exposure for large companies, and the returns are relatively medium or low, on par with market, right? So that's why that's one. So next and mid cap have high return potential. The small cap gives a much more higher return potential. So by spreading across all of these, I'm expecting my returns to be average out, right? So average out, and I expect that my portfolio should return anywhere from 10 to 14%. It could be higher or lower, but the bare minimum I'm expecting is 10 to 14%. So let's answer a common question. Do you really lose out by investing entirely in index funds? Well, yes and no. Sure, there are mutual funds that beat the index, especially in bull markets. But there is a catch, right? To consistently pick those winning funds, you need time, research, and all of these with regular monitoring. So let's be honest, right? If you're choosing index funds, you are basically a passive investor. You don't want that extra burden of keeping tabs of all of these things and those things. So Now let's talk numbers, right? You might lose anywhere from 1 to 3% of alpha, basically, which is slightly more. That's extra return above the index if you go with the regular funds during especially bull runs, right? Like right now. But again, that's the compromise you'll have to do, right? That's the trade-off that when you go with index investing, you're choosing simplicity over and lower cost over peace of mind and chasing returns, comparing this, that, and all of with margin outperformance. So that's the fundamental rationale behind this. So your returns are driven by market performance and not by a fund manager's bets, and that's the whole point of being a passive investor or the philosophy of passive investing. So now that you heard from me, I want to know what are your thoughts on index funds? How have you approached your investing journey? And do you have a portfolio like this, right? And share your portfolio details and all of that, and your thoughts in comment section. Let's talk and learn from each other, all of these, right? And also do drop your questions. I'll be happy to answer the questions and also create more videos around the topic. So again, thank you for watching. If you have liked this video, do hit that like button and subscribe for getting regular updates. Thank you, and do share with your friends and family if you like the video. Thank you for watching.